Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. Oh, we've done it, kids. We've went and we got ourselves the whole set. We've been chasing down the subject of this next interview for a little bit of time here. There's been some bumps in the road, some technical challenges, but it's finally happening. As those of you who follow the show know, we have been doing our very, very best to have conversations with all of the candidates for the NDP leadership because they've got this leadership race going on. And there's one who's been particularly elusive, a little slippery, but we got him. He's here in front of us today, and we're going to ask him the questions and probably some bonus questions because there's been some developments since we finished our last set of interviews. I am extremely excited and grateful to welcome to the program none other than Gil McGowan. Gil, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How about you, Nate?
I'm fantastic. It's the weekend. We finally got you on the program. It's nothing but winning over here.
Well, I apologize for being elusive. I don't know if slippery is the right word, but yeah, we've been trying to, we were the last ones to enter the race. And so we've been playing catch up and in the process running all around the province. So sorry, we made you wait so long.
No, no, not at all. And to be clear, when I say slippery, I'm not like it's like when you're trying to like hold on to like a fish and it's not the fish's fault that it's slippery. It's just the nature of the thing.
Yeah,
It's sometimes it's a little bit hard to get a good grip on, but we got you
yeah,
here, and I
yeah,
have
you
a whole
landed me. Yeah.
list of questions for you. Before we get into the questions, the policy, the issues, one of the things that we've been doing at the start of all of these interviews is we've been asking the candidates to, in their own words, introduce themselves. So, to begin with, who is Gil McGowan?
Okay, well, if people know me, it's probably as the president of the Alberta Federation of Labor, which is the largest union advocacy worker advocacy organization in the province. So we represent unionized workers in both the public and private sector, and it's an elected position. I have to get elected and reelected every 2 years. So I'm actually in my 10th term, 19 years as president. Um, and we do a lot of stuff to stand up for working people. So people have probably heard of me or seen me in the news standing up for better wages, better health and safety, defending public services. These are the things that our members value, and I'm very proud to be able to work with them and stand up for the things that they believe in. But I did actually have a life before I became a union leader. Uh, I'm a farm kid. I grew up on a farm north of Edmonton, between two little tiny towns called Dapp and Rochester, and I went to elementary and junior high in a little town called Clyde, Alberta, population 350, and then high school in Westlock, which has actually been in the news for other reasons of late. So yeah, so I grew up on a farm. I learned how to drive a tractor before I learned how to drive a truck. My brothers and I picked rocks and picked roots, and my first paid job off the farm was at a feedlot, uh, where I learned the value of health and safety because they didn't have any. But after finishing high school in Westlock, I moved to the big city of Edmonton. I got a university degree at the U of A. And while I was there, two bugs bit me. The first was activism. And so I was very active on campus right from the beginning. As a founding member of something they call the Lubicon Lake Student Support Group. And this is probably aging me, but I was also involved in the movement to encourage our university to divest from South Africa because that was the end of the apartheid era. And in fact, actually, the first public speech I ever gave was a speech in my first year as a student explaining why we thought that the U of A should divest itself from South Africa in order to support the global movement to end apartheid. And we actually convinced the U of A Board of Governors. And I thought that's the way it worked. He gave a speech and then things happened. I subsequently I learned that it wasn't always that easy. Um, But while I was there, I also got bit by the journalism bug, and I ended up becoming the news editor of the campus paper, The Gateway. So campus activism, campus journalism, and that led to my career. Actually, I was a reporter. I went off to Ottawa for a few years and got a master's degree in journalism. And then I worked as a reporter at a very low level, so I don't want to make it sound very glamorous, but my journalism career was brief but intense, and I worked for Canadian Press, the Edmonton Journal, CTV, and that's actually where I got involved in the labor movement. When I was at Carleton, I was a teaching assistant, and we were unionized, and like a lot of working people who've become involved in their unions, someone convinced me to show up at a union meeting, and before the meeting was over, I was a shop steward, and we were actually negotiating. And my first meeting, I became a shop steward, and I joined a team of people making picket signs. We didn't actually end up going on strike, but we were preparing for one. And so that was the third bug that bit me, was the union bug. And the labor movement is a really important institution in Canadian society, not just in the workplace, but on the political stage. And so my activism sort of grew and blossomed from there. And then when I was given an opportunity to spend my career standing up for people, I felt I couldn't think of a better way to spend my life, standing up for things I believe in, helping other people. And so over the years, I became a union staffer before, and then eventually union president. But all the time, I've been actually one of the first big campaigns I ran here was during the Klein years against cuts in healthcare, and I ended up being the communications coordinator for a little group called Friends of Medicare, which you may have heard of. Um, and and so my activism in the labor movement, my activism on the political stage sort of grew together. Um, and uh, and then the final thing I'll say is I'm a dad. I have three beautiful kids. They're on their way to being fully grown now. So the oldest is 24, the youngest is 20, and so they're turned into really wonderful young adults, and they're finding their way in the world. But like a lot of parents, I'm worried about what the future holds for them. I'm really worried that they'll perhaps never be able to own a home. And there's lots of precarity in the labor market, and so like a lot of parents, I really worry about what the future holds for them. So, and I also have my mom just turned 90 about a month ago, and like a lot of, so I'm sort of the sandwich generation, right? So I had to make a tough choice, working with her to move her into a long-term care facility. Um, Actually, on the day that Rachel announced that she was stepping down as leader, um, I was with my mom in the hospital because she had a fall, and I actually I had to turn my phone off because people were asking me if I was going to run, and I just turned my phone off for about a week as I, sat with my mom in the hospital, and then subsequently arranged for her to move into a long-term care facility. But she's doing really well. But I mean, that's where I am. I'm like a lot of, Albertans of a certain age. I've got kids that are at university. I have an aging parent, and juggling, family, with my job, and now making this crazy decision to throw my hat into the leadership race. So, but we obviously we're going to talk about that. So I'll stop there. And if you have any other questions about my background and who I am, I'd be happy to answer them.
Well, there's so much to unpack there, but I feel like I'd be irresponsible if I didn't ask. I mean, you have taken what some people might characterize as a very let's go with left-leaning
Yeah.
life path. Do you think it was the Laurentian elite journalism education that turned you that way? Because I hear from the premier of the province that it's those darn journalism schools that just keep turning everybody left.
No, actually, if anything, my thinking on politics was shaped uh, right here in Alberta, in fact, in rural Alberta. And it's actually, I think I'm the uh, the 21st century result of what some people would describe as agrarian socialism. I mean, people forget that Alberta wasn't always a really conservative province, and that in fact the party that is the predecessor of the NDP, the CCF, and people will remember the founding document of the CCF, the Regina Manifesto, Democratic Socialism. Um, but that document was actually passed at the second convention of the CCF, which was, as the name implies, in Regina. But the CCF was actually founded in Alberta, in Calgary of all places, at the Calgary District Labor Council Labor Temple. So that was farmers and workers getting together, founding what became Canada's Social Democratic Party in Alberta. And growing up on the farm, my dad was he actually voted for Peter Lougheed, um, but my dad is gone now. But he would have said that Peter Lougheed would be a New Democrat today, uh, because he took an activist approach to government. That my dad was an old CCFer, but he felt comfortable with the Lougheed era of PCs. We also had an even older farmer down the road who was one of the organizers for the CCF in the 40s and 50s, and he would often come to our house and my dad, and he would talk politics. And so at the kitchen table in rural Alberta, so that's where a lot of my idea, I was just a kid listening to these things, and it was formative for me. So not Laurentian elites. It was rural agrarian socialism, rooted right here in Alberta.
You teed up the Lougheed thing. There's two different ways that I could go with it. I'm going to go the easy route to start with. I mean, you say Lougheed would have been NDP.
Yeah,
And certainly
without a
we
doubt.
saw a column from Danielle Smith a few years back where she said that Rachel Notley was the inheritor. She was the modern day Lougheed. So it sounds like the Premier of Alberta would agree with that assessment. But one of the big questions, and this is where we'll start to kind of work our way through the list. One of the big questions that I've been asking all the leadership candidates is the party of the NDP has historically been defined by the not just Rachel Notley, but sort of the Notley legacy going all the way back to Grant Notley.
Yeah.
But certainly for the last bunch of years, it's been I'm with Rachel, and it's the party of Rachel Notley. So there's going to be a redefinition of the NDP no matter what, whether there's a shift on the political spectrum. It probably depends on who wins the leadership race, but there's going to be a redefinition of the NDP as no longer being the party of Rachel Notley, but something new. So the question to you, sir, is how do you envision or how do you redefine, how would a Gil McGowan leadership redefine the NDP?
Well, this is a fundamental question, and it is probably the biggest reason I made the choice to throw my hat into the ring, because we are at a crossroads, and whoever we choose to lead the party will define it, in the same way that Rachel defined her era. And what I'm worried about is that we may take the wrong path. The path that I would like to take is actually a path that takes us back to our roots. Not only because, those are more closely aligned with my values and my priorities, but also I think it's the way we win. Because, and I'm not someone who beats around the bush, so I'll go right to the core of my concern. Um, I would say, as someone who's been a member of the party for 38 years, so I joined the party when I was 16, um, and I'm a student of history, and I've spent a lot of time reading about the CCF and the NDP, and talking to a lot of older party members. I've been very active, right? And so I know a lot about the party, and I'm concerned that the party has drifted too far towards the mushy middle, And I actually think that's one of the reasons we lost in the last election. And one of the reasons I decided to run is because I actually want to challenge this notion that the New Democrats can only win in Alberta by becoming some soft version of the old progressive conservatives, so PC 2.0. And in fact, I think we spent a lot of time in 2019 and 2023 in those provincial elections trying to avoid offending people as opposed to inspiring them. And so the result was that in 2019 and 2023, we were really good at telling people what we were against, but not what we were for. And you know, and when we were pushed, it was almost like we were apologetic for being progressive. And right now, there are some really pressing issues that are crying out for progressive solutions. And based on the conversations I've had with my fellow Albertans and my fellow New Democrats, and honestly, based on the polling that I've seen, and including polling that we've done at the Federation of Labor, I'm convinced that Albertans are ready for big progressive propositions to deal with the problems that face them, Albertans individually, but also face our province as a whole. So, for example, the big concern on the minds of most Albertans right now is affordability, and whether it's rent or mortgage, or auto insurance or power bills or school fees, you name it, everything is more expensive. And in fact, here in Alberta, we have the dubious distinction of having the highest rate of inflation among all Canadian provinces, while at the same time having the slowest rate of wage growth. So, the water is rising and our incomes are sinking, and so something radical needs to be done. Like, we need policies that help make life more affordable, and we should be the party that's championing those policies. And this goes back to my point about how the NDP has sort of drifted to the middle. We're afraid, and we've become afraid to offer the solutions that our province really needs. So, for example, we saw the price of power go up by 128% last year, because a handful of big utilities were using their market power to price gouge people, and the deregulated privatized system that we have here in Alberta allowed them to do that. And so, we are a social democratic party that believes in, active government in support of the public interest. So why aren't we calling for re-regulation of the power market? I mean, we're the only Canadian province that has a deregulated privatized system, and we only have this deregulated privatized system since 2001. So before that time, we had a regulated system. Every other province has a regulated system. They didn't see this kind of price gouging, and it's built into the deregulated market system. So, and there's an affordability crisis. So here, this is the time where New Democrats should be shouting from the rooftops. This is an example of the role that government has to play, especially in sectors of the economy that are dominated by monopolies, right? So that's why we have public power that in other provinces. And this is not radical. It's progressive, but it's not radical. Literally every other Canadian province has regulated power markets, and they call them cost of service systems. That then the price is set by a regulator. We used to do it. Every other province does it. No one else had the same kind of price spike. So why aren't we saying re-regulated power, right? And why aren't we saying let's introduce a public power corporation to keep the big utilities honest, right? So that's an example. But I mean, I've suggested that in my platform. Similarly, I'm saying, like, we have, our auto insurance rates are like more than double what they are in our neighboring provinces, which have public auto insurance. So this is the perfect time for us to go back to our roots, be who we are, which is a social democratic party, and offer people a real solution for affordability by introducing public auto insurance. I mean, that like and I think that that's the choice to your point, right? I mean, we're like, what will the future look like under my leadership of the New Democrats? I will go back to the future. I mean, like, I think New Democrats got it right in places like BC and Saskatchewan and Manitoba when they wholeheartedly embraced the social democratic roots. They introduced public auto insurance, public power, public health care, of course, public education. This is who we are, and I actually think uh, that's not just good policy, but I also think it's good politics right now, right? And like you look at what Danielle Smith is doing on the right. Um, Honestly, many of the things that she's doing are outrageous, but they're big and bold. They cut through the static of this increasingly, our attention spans are really short, and everyone our attention is being demanded on all sorts of, but she cuts through the static with the Sovereignty Act or with the Alberta Pension Plan. Big idea. They're awful ideas, don't get me wrong, but we need to counter them with big ideas of our own, as opposed to warmed over mushy middle rhetoric, right? So I think that the way we win is not by putting more water in our wine, but rather being true to who we are. So I actually think we win by being more New Democrat than less.
Lot to unpack there. You gave me a lot to choose from. But there's a couple of things in particular that I want to focus on in particular. One of the big questions that has sort of been on the periphery of your campaign is you have maintained your position as president of the AFL as you've been running your campaign, and there's been some people who have said. And I'd be remiss if I didn't ask this question. There's some people have been said, the role of organizations like the AFL or any of the other unions or labor representative organizations, I'll say that clumsily, is to hold government to account. And to ensure that government is doing the things that they should be doing to ensure that workers are being treated the way that workers should be treated. You talked about the health and safety stuff at the feedlot that you started
Yeah.
working at. How do you delineate the difference between you're running to be the leader of the NDP, ostensibly to become the next premier of Alberta, um, but at the same time, like you're still the president of the AFL. How do you delineate those two roles? And I think the bigger question is how would you delineate those two pieces going forward? Because I mean, you've been the president of the AFL for quite some time. I'm
Yeah.
sure the labor piece is very much in your blood, but government is much bigger than that. So how do you balance all of those things, I guess, is my question.
Yeah. Well, I've heard these questions and criticisms. Uh, and my first response would be to say that unions uh, were created to give ordinary working people more power, to be blunt. I mean,
Yeah, for sure.
because honestly, like I think no one would disagree that wealth brings power. So people who have more money have more power. And historically, unions were created to redress that power imbalance because, individually, ordinary working people don't have a lot of power. The only power we have is when we come together. And so unions were created as a mechanism to empower workers. Uh, first in the workplace, but also on the political stage. And I want to make that really clear. Like that is our roots. We did, like if you look back at the history of unions in Canada and around the world, it was all about empowering workers, balancing the scales. And so it's always been part of the mission of the unions affiliated with the Alberta Federation of Labor and the Canadian Labor Congress to magnify our strength through collective action. And I'll remind you that the NDP in particular was created as a historic partnership between the old CCF, primarily representing farmers, and the Canadian Labour Congress, representing workers. And just as as a point of interest, as president of the Federation of Labor here in Alberta, I am the Alberta Vice President for the Canadian Labor Congress. So the Canadian Labor Congress is the founding partner of the NDP. We in the labor movement helped create the NDP because we felt that working people needed their own party. So I guess for a lot of people who don't know that history, but knowing that history, I think it's clear why there's no inconsistency with the president of the Federation of Labor, which is the representative of the CLC, which is one of the founding partners. There's no inconsistency between, in fact, I'm surprised that it hasn't happened more often that labor leaders and provincial federation presidents haven't run in the past. That's not to say that there haven't been labor leaders who have run. In fact, one of Canada's most successful premiers was Gary Doer in Manitoba. I think he won 4 terms and widely respected as one of the best premiers that Manitoba ever put out, and arguably one of the best premiers in recent memory in Canada. He was a union leader, so I think it's entirely consistent. And the other thing, especially as a federation president, I don't spend my time negotiating contracts or handling grievances. I spend my time advocating on big issues that matter to our members. So, like healthcare, like education, but also like economic issues. So for the last 10 years, I've spent a very big chunk of my time working with our members in the private sector, especially in oil and gas related construction, to figure out what the future looks like, as the world starts this bumpy transition away from fossil fuels, which is sort of the beating heart of our economy. And so, and being Federation of Labor president has actually given me all sorts of opportunities to become like a public policy expert, to become an investment expert. So, just as an example, I mean, when Rachel was premier, she appointed me to co-chair something called the Energy Diversification Advisory Committee. Fancy name, but my co-chair was from the oil and gas industry, and the committee that we had was filled with business people and people from municipalities and Indigenous communities, and we put together a blueprint for diversifying our economy within oil and gas with a focus on petrochemicals. We made recommendations that were implemented not only by the NDP, but also subsequently by the UCP, and those recommendations led to the billions of dollars in investment, the creation of thousands of jobs. And I get it. A lot of people don't know that I've had that kind of experience. But in addition to that, like just last year, we created in the labor movement, once again, our oil and gas, construction, manufacturing, transportation unions, we put together a blueprint for diversifying our economy. And we took that to Ottawa, and I presented it and had all sorts of conversations with the federal government, especially Chrystia Freeland, the finance minister. And that led to a commitment for billions of dollars of investment tax credits, which will create thousands of jobs here in Alberta. And in addition, I've been the chair of the local authorities pension plan, which is the biggest pension plan in Alberta, $60 billion under administration, providing retirement security for 300,000 Albertans. And I've had to learn a lot about investment. So I get it. A lot of people aren't paying attention to what we're doing in our little corner, but as I have had this great privilege because of my position as the elected president of the AFL. I've developed a whole bunch of expertise, which I actually think is exactly pertinent to the role of an opposition leader and potentially premier. Even just running the Federation of Labor, it's a multi-million-dollar organization, and I'm a worker leader and advocate, but I run this organization. So I hire, I fire, I deal with contractors, I deal with budgets, so people don't think of labor leaders, but like our unions are big institutions and organizations, and I'm very proud of the way we run them here. So I've run a big organization. I've been a public figure. I've developed public policy chops. I've developed economic chops. And with due respect to some of the other people in the race, they don't have that kind of experience. But because there's so much change happening in the global economy, especially in the energy space, that's where I've been working for the better part of the last decade. So I actually think I bring a whole bunch of stuff to the table that is exactly what the next premier of this province needs, especially if it's a premier that is committed to a social democratic approach to preparing us for a future that's going to look different than our past.
I'm going to ask you a question I saw asked at the debate, because I don't think that you got this question, but given everything that you just said, I think it might be pertinent. You're talking about all the skills that you bring to the table for the NDP. The One of the other candidates was asked the question, okay, so if you're all of these great things, will you commit to running in the next election as an NDP MLA? So, I mean, not to put you on the spot too much, because I know it's like 3 years away,
Yeah.
but if you're not successful in becoming the leader of the NDP, would you run as an MLA?
I've thought about running as an MLA before, and there's some practical constraints. The first of which is that I live in Edmonton, and every seat is currently held by a New Democrat. So, honestly, a lot of it is on like Rachel stepping down as leader, and I think there is an assumption that she might vacate her seat early if someone wins the leadership who does not currently have a seat, and that would be myself or Ned. And so I'd be really proud to succeed Rachel in Strathcona. I actually have roots in that community, so when I came from the farm, moved into Edmonton, Strathcona was the neighborhood where I settled, and that's where my wife and I bought our first house. And so, and I was actually on the constituency association for Edmonton Strathcona for years when I was younger. I was also on the community league board as the community development coordinator. So I took all the development issues and talked about them at City Hall. And so like I have, and it's where, I helped build a playground for my kids in that neighborhood. So I would really be proud if I had an opportunity to run to succeed Rachel, not only as leader, but also as the MLA for Edmonton Strathcona. So yeah, I would do that, and in a heartbeat. And but on that point, and you know, I think when you're talking about leading a party, the being a party leader is more than just standing up in front of the media. It's it's about more than just being the face of the party during an election or during question period. The party leader has to be committed for the long haul uh, to actually run the party and lead it and make sure that it grows, right? And so um, I think the question that I would have in particular for the head is what happens if he loses, if he becomes leader and then he loses the next election? Will he stick around to to pick up the pieces and rebuild for the next election? That's something that I will commit to doing, and I think people who've been in Met Party members for years know that about me. I'm a stayer, and I'm a builder, right? I did that, and I've been a builder with the Federation of Labor, so I think there's a history there. I'm not I don't flit in and flit out, right? I mean, like I've been president for almost 20 years, and when I first became president, the AFL was in a bad way financially. It had a very low profile, had only about 100,000 members. We have 175,000 members now. I've balanced the budget every year that I've been president, and I've done it not by cutting, but by growing. And we've grown by inspiring people as opposed to just trying to be like managerial, right? And like big ideas. So like and so yeah, I mean, like, will I stick around? Yeah, I've already stuck around. I stuck around for like I was meeting with the New Democrat youth, for example, and I actually think I'm the only candidate in the leadership race who is actually a member of the New Democrat youth. Okay, like a lot of them, like we have sitting MLAs. Ned is only recently a party member, but I was there from the beginning. Like I joined the party when I was 16. I've worked in every provincial election since that time, knocking on doors for other candidates, not for myself. I've filled almost every position that you can think of within the party. I was, volunteer coordinator. I was a campaign coordinator. I was a candidate. I actually ran communications for the party in the 1997 election when we went from 0 seats to two. So I've been there, and so I think and I think people understand that if I were to win, I wouldn't just run for a seat. I wouldn't just stand there in front of the media. I wouldn't just be. I would be a builder of the party, right? And I'd be there for the long haul, just the same way Rachel was, right? And that's the other thing. Rachel's a few years older than I am, and she did what I did. Like she went through the youth, and she was in the trenches all the time. And as I was coming up in the party, it was always I was always sort of in Rachel's shadow. People talk wistfully about how wonderful it was when Rachel was in the youth, and it's like, So that I aspire to do as well as she did in terms of not just winning elections, but building the party.
So to paraphrase or to rephrase, just to be clear, if there's an open seat, an available nomination in
Yeah,
Edmonton, you would run as an MLA regardless of the outcomes of the leadership race.
yeah, yeah,
Okay, perfect.
yeah.
Let's get into
And
the
and,
policy.
and I'll just say, like I've been president of the federation for 20 years, um, and it's been a good run, and I'm proud of it, right? Um, but I want to be part of a new Democrat government. I really do, and because this is a scary time in Alberta, but it's also an exciting time. And one of the reasons I'm running is because I'm afraid that the UCP is getting it wrong. I think we can get it right, and we can do it by being like a full-throated social democratic government at a time where we need leadership in the public interest. We can do that. I'm excited about the opportunity, and I want to be part. I really, really want to be part of that.
All right, well, let's get into the policy then. One of the big topics that has been bounced around has been the carbon tax. We've seen certainly. Actually, I'm thinking about it, and I can't think of a single NDP candidate off the top of my head that we've interviewed so far that has said, "Oh yeah, no, we're totally going to stick with the carbon tax. It's the best thing ever." There's been a lot of candidates who have said, "Yeah, we crapped the bed on that one, either from a comm standpoint or from a buy-in standpoint." What's your thoughts on the carbon tax? Should there be a non-industrial consumer carbon tax in the province of Alberta?
Yeah, well, I have an interesting personal story about that because, as I said, I've been president of the Federation of Labor for almost 20 years. So I was in my current position when the New Democrats won in 2015, and we've always had a close relationship with the NDP, including when they were in government. So uh, when they were in the process of developing the climate leadership plan, there were opportunities for us to consult. And as president of the Federation of Labor, I was actually not that thrilled about the idea of a carbon tax. I said that the goal of reducing our emissions is paramount. We have to do our part to address climate change. I still believe that. But there are other ways that we can reduce our emissions, especially on the consumer side. And I just want to make it really clear that I would be a big defender of maintaining carbon pricing, big industrial carbon pricing, because there's absolutely no other way that we can bring down emissions on the industrial side. And that's the big elephant in the room. Like Alberta has 12% of the population, but we have 40% of the Canadian emissions. There's no way that Canada can reach its emissions goals without Alberta. And frankly, that means the oil and gas sector, because oil and gas produces about 240 megatons of emissions. Well, Alberta produces 240 megatons of emissions, and 140 megatons of that is from oil and gas. And they're not going to, the companies working in that space are not going to reduce their emissions out of the kindness of their hearts. There has to be a price incentive, and it has to be escalating. And honestly, I would say it has to be escalating at a faster rate than it is now, because technology, which is the way that you reduce emissions, or one of the big ways you reduce emissions, it costs money, and so there has to be a financial incentive for them to invest in the emission reduction. So that has to stay. Um, on the commercial, um, the personal side, I've always, and I made this argument at the beginning. I said, like, this idea about consumer, because people don't see the consumer price, right? And the argument about rebates, it's not intuitive. And what I always thought was more straightforward is outright subsidies. If you want people to put solar panels on their roof, if you want them to put better windows or insulation in their house, provide a subsidy, an incentive, right? It's same for electric vehicles, or heat pumps, or whatever it is that you think is necessary to bring down emissions in homes and buildings. I made that argument at the beginning that people are much more likely to make the big decisions in their own personal life that will reduce their emissions if there's a subsidy attached to it. And we've seen that in other jurisdictions. I mean, look south of the border, right? Under the Biden administration, the Americans are actually kicking our asses in terms of reducing emissions. I'm not sure people appreciate just how much of the Americans are kicking our asses in terms of reducing emissions. Obviously there's more work to be done, but they don't have a consumer carbon tax, and so the Biden administration in particular has preferred subsidies that are designed to change consumer behavior, and encourage people to make decisions that will help them contribute to reducing emissions. That's honestly, that's what I proposed at the beginning, but I wasn't a big fancy economist, and it's true that it is more expensive to do that, right? Because like when you have a consumer price, when you have a price on carbon for consumers, there's no initial outlay from the government, right? It's consumers making choices based on price signals. This is the kind of stuff that economists love. Uh, and honestly, I was happy with it once it was introduced. But the conservatives in particular have weaponized it, and I think it's been horribly irresponsible the way they've weaponized it, and they've been really dishonest and disingenuous. Not calculating the rebates but the reality is the politics have been lost, right? But that doesn't mean we should give up on efforts to reduce emissions. And so, if and then the final thing I'll say is that this may be a moot point. I mean, like the polls suggest that the Trudeau government is going to be defeated. Pierre Poilievre will become prime minister. Heaven forbid, but I think he'll be an awful prime minister. But his big promise is to axe the tax, so he's probably going to get rid of it. So, like, it's not an Alberta tax, so like I don't know why we're spending so much time talking about it. It's probably going to they're going to get rid of it. I think but if we become government, we'll just have to roll up our sleeves and find another way to convince Albertans to participate in the process of reducing emissions. And I think the solution on the consumer side is subsidies as opposed to a carbon tax.
We had a recent conversation with Dr. Jared Wesley, who is a political scientist out of the University of Alberta, and he raised a very, very interesting point.
I love
Uh,
that guy, by the way.
Oh, he's awesome. And he only cares about the facts, like, which is fantastic because he'll just tell you that you're wrong when you're wrong, and then you get to go, I learned something. But one of the things that he raised, and you've kind of brought it up yourself a little bit there in regards to the federal election, is Danielle Smith has done a very, very effective job. Excuse me. She's done a very, very effective job of saying, oh, it's the Notley Singh Trudeau alliance. That's what the big enemy is. Now, that big enemy could very easily be going away very soon because as you said, the polling seems to indicate that Mr. Poilievre will be the next Prime Minister of Canada, or at least he's got a high likelihood of it, which not only moves the Notley Singh Trudeau alliance off the table because they wouldn't be government anymore. Um, But it has some interesting implications because one of the things that we've seen throughout this leadership race is there have been multiple candidates who have said, oh, the UCP, they've just weaponized the relationship between us and the federal NDP so very much. And it seems like there's kind of two pieces to that. I mean, yeah, for sure, if there was to be a coalition government or if there was to be a liberal government, then that argument can persist. But if Polyev comes in, then it doesn't really matter that alliance anymore. But nonetheless, we have several candidates who are saying, "Hey, you know what? We want to give the membership the conversation as to whether or not we should defederate from the federal NDP." So would you favor the severing of the relationship between the provincial NDP and the federal NDP? Do you want to maintain that relationship? What are your thoughts, sir?
The short answer is no. I would not favor severing ties with the federal party. And I actually think that way too much stock has been put in this argument that the reason Albertans didn't vote for the New Democrats here in Alberta in the last election was because of our ties to the federal party. Like that, we're responding to conservative talking points, and that's actually one of the things that drives me. It's actually so led me. One of the reasons I've thrown my hat into the ring. We should stop being led around by the nose by Danielle Smith's talking points. We should set our own agenda instead of just responding to hers. And will she? Here's the thing. Even if we sever ties with the federal NDP, do you think that's going to stop them from rhetorically tying us together? I mean, you mentioned it yourself, the Notley Trudeau Singh alliance. Well, the New Democrats have never been formally tied to the Trudeau Liberals. They're entirely separate parties. That never stopped Danielle Smith from trying to tie us together. And we're actually seeing it already. Like Danielle Smith is testing out new lines. You may have seen the Rick Bell column from the Calgary Sun, and Rick is where Danielle Smith goes to test new lines, right? Like we know this, right? And what did she tell him in a recent interview? She said that that Naheed Nenshi is Trudeau's choice to lead the Alberta NDP. Get used to hearing that. Okay, it's like so we could sever ties with the federal NDP. They're still going to tie us to them, and we're not tied to the Liberals, but they're still going to tie us to them. Instead of worrying about their talking points, we should be worrying about the offer that we make to Albertans and setting our own agenda and getting people talking about our big ideas that will change the province and increase wages and strengthen the economy and create jobs. And I'm just so tired of spending all our time responding to Danielle Smith's latest crazy idea. Obviously, we have some of them are really crazy. I mean, and it's like almost nonstop with her. But I'll point out that that's a strategy, right? And we've heard it from south of the border with Donald Trump and his Svengali guru Steve Bannon. He's famous for saying how you win is by flooding the zone with shit, right? Very eloquent guy. But that's what's happening here in Alberta. The UCP and Danielle Smith are flooding the zone with shit, and we're just jumping in at every time they flood the zone with shit. We dive right in, and instead of diving into their shit, I think we should be walking away and directing the attention of Albertans towards our big vision for healthcare, for education, for human rights, which are our core strengths. But we need to add, that we need to become the party of preparing for change in the global economy. We need to be the party of wage growth. We need to be the party of affordability. And those are the things that we should be talking about instead of constantly responding to this craziness coming from Danielle Smith and her allies and groups like Take Back Alberta. Let them flood the zone with shit. Let's not wade into it anymore. So on the subject of the federal party, no, I wouldn't sever ties. Do we have some concerns about the federal NDP? Sure, we do. But I think that we deal with them by electing more New Democrats from Alberta. I mean, like you look at the New Democrats who we have elected, um, like Jesile, Heather McPherson. They're fabulous MPs. They're fabulous MPs, and they represent us really well. And we just need more of them. And if there were more of them in the caucus, then the caucus would be more reflective of our priorities. And they punch way above their weight. If we had a few more, I think you'd see a change in the complexion of the federal NDP. Having said that, though, I think we have to stop apologizing because the federal government has actually accomplished a whole bunch of really important things in this term, this minority term, and this supply and confidence agreement that was struck between the Liberals and the federal New Democrats uh, has has borne real fruit that benefits Albertans. And I don't know why we're not saying this, right? And in fact, like when people ask me, I say I love minority governments at the federal level, right? It was a minority government in the 60s between the Liberals led by Lester Pearson and the New Democrats led by Tommy Douglas that gave us Medicare, that gave us CPP, that gave us the Canadian flag, right? I mean, and then in this minority government, we got universal childcare, we got pharmacare, we got dental care. For us in the labor movement, we got anti-scab legislation, which is a big priority for us. So this was not a disaster, and we should stop accepting this conservative frame that that Canada is broken and that the current government is like seriously the current government has given more in transfer payments to Alberta on a per capita basis than they have to any other province. And and in fact, I just like last year, I was instrumental in negotiating about $15 billion of investment tax credits for diversification projects. The first big one was the net zero hydrogen plant, the expansion of the Dow facility in Fort Saskatchewan. Like our fingerprints were all over that. And I was at the table. Alberta Business were at the table. You know who wasn't at the table having negotiations about those investment tax credits? Danielle Smith, because she was too worried. She's spending all her time in these pissing matches with Ottawa. You're playing politics instead of trying to make a deal, And so that's the other thing. Like I've been a deal maker, and I know that unions have this reputation for existing only to strike, but the reality is we exist to make deals in the best interest of the people we represent. And in fact, like 98%, 99% of all the collective agreements that are ever negotiated in this province are negotiated without recourse to strike. And it's the same when we're dealing with governments on a policy level. We get in there, we try to get the best possible deal for the people we represent. And I'm very proud that we did that. Like we had this thing called the Industrial Policy Coalition of our private sector unions, and I chair it. And so like I went to Ottawa, I helped negotiate these investment tax credits and just that project I mentioned, the net zero hydrogen project, that's going to create 6,000 construction jobs in Alberta. It's going to create 500 operations jobs and countless jobs in local supply chains. And we did that, right? And I'm not going to claim sole credit for that, but Alberta Labor was at the table, Alberta Business was at the table, but Danielle Smith was not. And like I would like to have a conversation with her as leader of the NDP. Like, why weren't you at the table when we were negotiating the future of the Alberta economy? Why were you playing politics? Why did I, as the president of the Federation of Labor, have to speak for Alberta when our premier wouldn't come to the table, right? So I would love, as leader, to be able to have a conversation with Danielle Smith.
I suspect that the answer probably has a great deal to do with the number of cameras that were in the room at the time,
Yeah,
but that's
yeah,
just
there was zero.
speculation on my part. I want to hit some of the other topics that I have to
Sure.
hit though. You talked about the affordability piece,
Yeah.
and there are real conversations that are going on in the province of Alberta right now in regards to and they're two separate but related things. There's the housing crisis, the affordability of housing crisis, but there's also the houselessness and the homelessness crisis. So in broad terms, what are your thoughts on the housing crisis, the affordability of housing crisis? Excuse me. Calgary's having a big conversation this week about rezoning for densification. What are your thoughts on that? And then as a follow-up, how do we address houselessness and homelessness in the province of Alberta?
Well, this has emerged as probably the biggest issue for Albertans, and for a very long time, we were actually the province that was much more affordable. In fact, the provincial government famously ran that Alberta's calling ad campaign around the province, around the country, saying, "Come to Alberta, housing is cheaper here, and we have more jobs." Ironically, uh, the campaign was a victim of its own success because it actually did encourage a lot of people to move here. But our provincial government forgot to make sure that there would be places for them to live. So it actually contributed to the problem. So we had these thousands of people responding to the ad campaign, and we had done nothing to make sure that a place to land. And so that ill-advised campaign, like good PR, like it's good for media coverage and stuff, but it actually really bad public policy. But yeah, so I mean, we used to be an affordable place to live. Now we're not, and it's getting worse. In fact, rents in Calgary are getting close to what they are in Toronto. I never thought I would have to say that, but it's happening. In fact, like my daughter is 24 and she was looking for a place in Calgary, and she had gone to school in Vancouver for her undergraduate degree, and the prices were almost the same. Like like this is and like I think there was just a poll released yesterday. Something like 80% of Gen Z kids, young people, think they'll never be able to own a house. So this, I mean, so like last week I released a platform on what I would do for affordability, and the first priority was housing. And in terms of what I would do, there's a whole list, but I'll just summarize some of them. The first thing that I would do is get out of the way of the municipalities. Like as president of the Federation of Labor, one of the things that I've learned is that the best solutions often come, or usually come, from the people who are closest to the problem. And municipalities are definitely closest to the problem. And I'm actually, as an Albertan, I'm really proud to see the leadership that is being taken by our municipal governments, not just in the big cities, but in smaller cities and smaller communities as well. There's a real ferment of ideas about housing. And but instead of, so if it were me, if I were premier, I would say let 1,000 flowers bloom, support them. But instead we've got a provincial government that is getting in the way of them making deals. With the federal government, for example, the federal government has put billions of dollars on the table. That's our money. That's our tax money. It should come back to us, but it's just perverse to have the UCP standing in the way of our own tax money coming back to help address the housing crisis. So number one, support the municipalities in their initiatives, including the conversation that they're having in Calgary about densification. The city of Edmonton has already had a similar conversation, and it's working. So I support our municipalities. I support densification. But there are big roles for the province. So the province, there are some taxes and fees that the province levies on development. We should get them down, get them as low as possible. We shouldn't be looking, the province should not be looking at housing as a cash cow. They should recognize that there's a crisis, and we should, try to, encourage as much building as possible. The other thing is the province owns a whole bunch of land, right? And I know that there are a lot of politicians talking about like just selling that land to developers. I would take a slightly different approach, because like in terms of new housing construction, land cost is like a disproportionate portion of the cost of new housing construction. And what I've seen in other jurisdictions, including even with Indigenous communities in places like Vancouver, they bring housing the land cost down by leasing it, and so instead of selling it, and then then the government can keep control over it better. So you can actually, so the development costs are lower, but you're also not giving over control to some big private developer. So I would use provincial land use this concept of leasing, and then I would also build affordable housing that's actually nice. And that this sounds like, because I mean, there's this stigma about public housing and affordable housing, but if you look in places like Singapore, Western Europe, um, like the majority of middle class people live in public housing, but it's deliberately meant to be comfortable for everyone, right? And people don't bat an eye. We could do the same thing right now. And so like letting the market decide, it hasn't worked. Obviously, there's a big role for private developers, but I think there needs to be a bigger. And this goes back to my point about being a full-throated social democratic government. I would create a public housing authority to develop public land for affordable housing. I would use that housing authority to support cooperatives, because cooperatives used to be a big part of the housing solution in the 70s and 80s, and then the funding was just cut. And but that's a solution. So there's all sorts of really good ideas out there. The provincial government just needs to get behind them.
Okay. What about the houselessness and homelessness piece? Because there's, one of the things that we're really good at in this province is when it gets cold, we go, the encampments and the homeless people and the things. And then it gets warm and we go, but it's stampede. I don't want to think about those things anymore. Uh,
Exactly.
so how do we resolve? What are your strategies? What do you want to see done if you were leader of the NDP? What do you want to see done to address the houselessness and the homelessness crisis?
Well, I mean, there's a whole bunch of strands there. I mean, the first thing is that there are models from other jurisdictions that really clearly show that dealing with homelessness and houselessness, the housing first approach is the best approach, right? Like we shouldn't wait until there are encampments on the streets, right? It's actually cheaper to build modest housing facilities, get people off the streets, get them into a place where they can have their own room, their own bed, their own bathroom, so they can, like a lot of the people on the streets are, they suffering from mental illness, addiction issues, and in order to get well, they need to be housed. And you can't, I mean, I just ask people to be empathetic, put themselves in that position. How well do you think you could deal with any problems in your life if you don't have a roof over your head? You don't have a bed to lay your head down at night. I mean, like how can you apply for a job? I mean, it's ridiculous, right? So housing first, it would be a priority for me, and I actually think it would save the provincial government money not even in the long term, but in the medium term. Um, I'm also I was at one of the forums I was at. I was chatting with uh, some some houselessness advocates, and they were talking about rent supplements. And I hadn't really like I won't pretend I'm a housing expert, but it seems to me that in the current housing crisis, the government should be trying to do everything it can to stop people from losing their accommodation before they do, right? And in a lot of cases, it's a question of a few $100 every month, right? Like because rents are going up, um, 200, 300, $400 a month. That's a lot for someone on a modest income. So I think that we should have a provincial program of rent supplements, um, to help people through this crisis, especially while we're waiting. Like if we commit to building more housing, more affordable housing, more cooperative housing, there's going to be a lag, right? And so housing supplements need to be a priority, and then of course rent control. I mean, we're one of the few jurisdictions in Canada that doesn't have rent control. The UCP just defeated Janice Irwin's bill on rent control. Given what's happening in the housing market, I mean that's a dereliction of duty on the part of the provincial government. So I think that every single one of our leadership candidates would get behind most of those initiatives. Certainly rent control, but it would be a priority for me.
Do you think there's room? I mean, as you're talking there, and we still have a couple more points that I definitely want to hit on.
Okay.
So if we start to run into a deadline, sir, please let me know. But do you think that there's one of the hesitations that people have expressed towards something like universal basic income has been, oh, they're just going to spend the money on drugs. Is there, do you think, room for a policy that said, you know what, we're going to do a UBI, but it's going to be tied directly to the costs of housing? So everybody gets, I'm making up numbers now, $500 a month, and that will go exclusively to your rent or your mortgage or whatever. Do you think that would reduce some of the perceived barriers for people accepting the idea of something like that while simultaneously addressing the housing piece?
I get really annoyed with this judgment stuff from, like, and honestly, it's coming from, a lot of, it's part of the conservative ideology that, you can't give someone a hand up. A hand up, like a handout is the same thing as a hand up. Like, it just, I don't know. That's not my worldview. And honestly, when it comes to things like universal basic income, there have been all sorts of pilot projects around the world, including here in Canada. I think there was a really successful one that may still be underway in Manitoba. And one of the conclusions is that the best outcomes are when you just give people the money, like no strings attached, and trust them to be adults. And lo and behold, wherever this has been tried, the money has been spent 99% of the time on the basics of life, right? Because you know, uh, and it's had beneficial, impacts for individuals, but also for the local economies. I don't know why uh, we have to be so judgy about this. Like these are our fellow citizens. So if I were premier, at the very least, I would support a really big basic income pilot project because I get it. It's a different kind of idea. We have to prove it, but there's a crying need. So like let's pick a few neighborhoods in Edmonton and Calgary, see how it works. And I'm convinced that if the policy is designed properly, it will work really well, and then we can expand it to the rest of the province. But I get it; it's a new idea, but let's instead of rejecting it out of hand, let's put it to the test. And so I would definitely get behind that.
Let's move to the opioid crisis. I mean, there's no questions that, and I think it's one of the talking points that has been misrepresented is there's a lot of people who talk about the opioid crisis and they're like, addiction. But when you actually take a look at what the addiction rates are, not just in Alberta, but across most of Canada, the addiction rates are fairly static. The numbers that we're seeing are increasing deaths. And those increasing deaths are for sure due to some degree to people who are trying to use opioids, but primarily due to the fact that it's a toxic supply. Daniel Smith and the UCP have said we're going to build all of these recovery communities, and then people can either choose to come to them. We might force some to, but that's also cool. Uh, and that will solve the problem. A lot of experts have said, well, that will potentially address some of the addiction issues depending on the models that you use. But for anybody who's not ready to go to treatment yet, or hasn't been forced to go to treatment yet, or is forced to go to treatment and it doesn't work because forced treatment doesn't work, is there still going to be the problems of the toxic supply? What are your thoughts on the opioid crisis? And then you have to know what question I'm going to ask after that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm going to preface my response by saying that this is not my area of expertise. Um, and so I would seek out advice from experts in the field, and I would try to make decisions based on evidence rather than ideology, um, which is the opposite of what's been happening from my perspective. So, having said that, though, it seems pretty clear to me, and honestly, you're exactly the kind of person that I would probably seek out for some advice and counsel on this, because in your day job, you're dealing with addiction. much more than most people. You see the face of it, the human face of it, right? And I think it's important to see the human face of it, because I don't know how we can be so dismissive of our fellow citizens who are clearly suffering and often dying, and just anyway, it's become a forum for politics and game playing, and we're ignoring the people, right? And so, I can tell you, you know, I'm inclined, based on what I've seen and heard, to believe that it was a big mistake for us to move away from safe supply. And I'm convinced by the argument, and I don't know why anyone is not convinced by the argument that you can't recover if you're dead. Um, and I'm also, it's not just ideology. I'm also afraid that because of the UCP approach, they're turning this tragedy into some kind of profit center for some of their buddies with harebrained treatment proposals that are really just like ways for them to grab some public money and put it in their pockets. And in fact, I was talking to some of our people from one of our, well, you're one of our unions, the Health Science Association. Some of them were at a conference where the government was talking about their new approaches with the Recovery Alberta model, and the treatment model, the Alberta model, right, which doesn't work. Hasn't reduced the number of fatalities. But at this conference, outside the hall, there was just a slew of private companies who are like circling like vultures, just waiting to grab a piece of this public pie, right? And I wasn't there, but what I heard is that the government is basically saying that they're going to allow some of these fly-by-night private operators to offer training to become like a treatment counselor, and it's only 3 days you can become a treatment counselor. I mean, like, what does that say about uh, you know the current government's actual the commitment to actually dealing with the problem? So um, I feel like I'm lucky. Like in my personal life, I haven't been touched by the opioid crisis, but I know so many Albertans have. And I'd just be committed to working with them to have a solution. Because safe supply, wraparound mental health supports, wraparound social supports. I mean, it's a complicated problem, right? And yeah, there's absolutely no way that we can continue doing what the UCP is doing, because it's killing people, and I would make it stop.
Yeah, and I just want to, sort of put the context on. I don't think that I've seen anybody advocating. I've certainly seen people misrepresenting what people are advocating for, but I don't think anybody's advocating for it. We should just do safer supply, and that's it, and then everything will be fine. I don't think anybody's making any sincerely making that argument. It's a multifaceted problem that requires a multifaceted evidence-based approach. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that you said the evidence-based and the experts. A couple other things I want to hit you with, sir. Um, we have seen Danielle Smith talk about a policy suite. And, I know there's a lot of people who are looking at this particular subject as, so do we still have to talk about this? And I feel like the answer is yes, because it's killing people and it will kill more. But she has introduced a policy suite where she has said that she's going to make sweeping changes to pronoun disclosure, pronoun use. A lot of these policies specifically target trans kids who are, the evidence is very, very clear, at the highest risk for things like human trafficking, houselessness, homelessness, substance abuse, sexual abuse, all of the very, very, very bad things, to say nothing of the suicide rates being something like 3 to 4 times higher than the average bear. Um, she said she's going to introduce these policies in September, October. If you were to become the leader of the NDP, are these policies that you would repeal? Are these policies that you would keep? Please
Oh,
don't
yeah.
say keep, because then I'm going to have to take you apart.
No. Oh my gosh. Of course we would repeal them. If I were premier, this would be like first legislative session priority would be to repeal whatever legislative horrors Daniel Smith and the UCP would introduce in this area. For me, the tougher thing is what to do in the lead up to the next election, because I know it's almost hard to believe how much damage they've done, but it hasn't even been a year, right? And so we're talking about another 3 years until the next provincial election, and as you mentioned, she's made a commitment to bring in some kind of legislation or new rules or regulations in the fall. So, like obviously as leader, I would commit to making this a priority to push back, and I think the goal would be to educate, right? So a lot of things that you just said about how this is a vulnerable population, how the evidence shows that that these young people are at much higher risk of self-harm and suicide, and that the evidence also shows that a lot of these procedures work and make it, or they're transformative in the lives of these young people. And so, like, I think the New Democrats have already been doing a good job of educating the public on these issues. However, I really think it's important, and I don't want to dismiss the importance of the issue, but I think it's important to understand what's going on here. This is a political tactic. Um, the almost everything that the UCP has done since forming government has been unpopular. They're introducing policies that they never talked about during the election campaign. They're moving forward despite huge public opposition, whether it's the pulling Alberta out of CPP or introducing parties in municipal politics. Basically, everything they touch is turned to shit, and people generally hate what they're doing. But it's clear that they've adopted this strategy of trying to weaponize some issues to distract from their failures in other areas. So, and there's no other issue that they weaponize more than the issue of healthcare for trans youth. And the fact that they're attacking a vulnerable group is bad enough, and what's even worse is that they're doing it for cynical political reasons. Like they did some polling and they found out that a slight majority of Albertans are uncomfortable with talk about gender reassignment, and of course they wrap it up with their rhetoric to talk about mutilation and all this stuff. And so this is a classic political distraction campaign. It's the most cynical and mean-spirited that I can think of. But if I were leader of the NDP, I would be really careful about not allowing them to pull us into make this the debate. They want this. It's a culture war thing, right? And the best way, from my perspective, the best way to protect the human rights and access to the healthcare that these vulnerable kids need is to defeat the UCP. and in order to defeat the UCP, we have to be strategic. And if people saw me in the debate, one of the big points that I made at the outset is that we have to we're all united as New Democrats. The UCP is a clear threat to our future. For the sake of everyone living in this province, we have to defeat them in 2027. But in order to defeat them, we have to figure out why we lost to them. And so everyone agrees we have to grow the tent, but strategically we have to figure out who's outside the tent. And right now, and this hurts my heart because I'm a worker advocate and a farm kid, but who's outside the tent are people outside the two big cities, and that's rural Alberta, but it also includes the smaller cities and smaller communities. But also working people, like people who describe themselves as working class, people with college, trades, and high school education. They're voting for the UCP, and that's not unique to Alberta. It's happening with Pierre Poilievre at the national level. It's happening with Trump south of the border. These conservative parties are taking legitimate worker anxiety and weaponizing it and turning it into anger and then using it for their political purposes. So for me, the best way to help trans kids is to defeat the UCP. But in order to defeat the UCP, we have to have a broader strategy for bringing people who are outside the tent into the tent. And honestly, it's economic issues. It's kitchen table issues, and then it's big picture economic issues. And so that's why, for me, I feel really strongly that we need to embrace the fact that we are the party of healthcare and education and human rights, but we also have to become the party of wage growth, the party of affordability, and the party with a plan to maintain our prosperity in a changing world. If we can do that, then, and we don't have to bring everyone who's outside the tent, but just enough, and there it's working people, and working people outside the big cities. So we need to work. We need to remember, go back to our roots as a working people's party, make them part of our coalition again. Stop this effort by the UCP and Pierre Poilievre to lure them away with anger. Offer them real solutions, and then that's how we defeat them. And by defeating them, we defend our vulnerable communities, including trans kids.
Do you think that there's a lesson? And I mean, this is not a question that I think I asked maybe one or two of the other candidates, but it's you kind of brought it up for me, so I'm going to go there. Do you think there's a lesson for the NDP to choose their battles more effectively? Because one of the
Yeah.
things that has struck me as I watch the conservative apparatus, I'll call it, speaking in the broadest terms, is they have the two pieces really these days. They have the parties that do the things, but they also have a massive media apparatus that I mean, it's a bit of a double-edged sword for them because they get real crazy sometimes, and every once in a while they got to march Rick McIver out to say, "Hey, we totally don't have a problem with voting tabulators, but we're going to outlaw them because the crazy people said so." So like I said, there's a bit of a double edge, but there isn't much of. I mean, there is the occasional show that I don't know gets the premier to unblock the province, but on Twitter, but there isn't a huge progressive media apparatus as much as Daniel Smith likes to say, oh, there's all this progressive media. There's really just not. There's not a
There's
media.
you, Nate. Yeah.
God help us if it's just the breakdown. But there is, we enjoy calling bullshit on Daniel Smith here at the show, and we enjoy fact checking Daniel Smith, although we could use a lot more resources. Just for the volume of shit that they flood the field with. But do you think that there's a lesson for the NDP to take away of like, hey, you know what, rather than try to be that thing, I'll phrase it this way, and I'm going to be a little flippant, but should the NDP try to do a little bit more NDPing and a little bit less breakdowning?
Yeah. I mean, this goes to the point that I was making before. Instead of always responding to the latest craziness coming from Daniel Smith and her surrogates like Take Back Alberta, we should be setting our own agenda, right? And I know that can be hard because the stuff that they're putting on the table is pretty outrageous, and it's hard not to get upset about it. But we have to remember that in a parliamentary system, between elections, the opposition doesn't have real power to change that legislation. There are some other countries where opposition parties can introduce legislation and that kind of thing, but that's not the case here. So I think that we have to accept that there's an important role for the opposition to oppose. But as Jack Layton famously said when he was leader of the federal NDP, is that we can't just oppose, we have to propose. And I'll remind people that when he took that approach of focusing on proposition as opposed to just opposition, he almost formed Canada's first NDP majority federal government. He won 100 seats or more than 100 seats. He didn't quite make it, but it was a huge leap forward. And I honestly think it's because he stopped allowing the other parties to set the agenda, and he started setting the agenda for himself. well, for the party, right? And I think we need to learn from that, and especially at a time when there's so many crises, like the people talk about poly crisis, right? And it's housing, it's wage stagnation, it's inequality, and of course it's climate change. These things are all on people's minds, and we should be the party that offers solutions to them. And that's what we should be talking about instead of being constantly drawn into the battles that the UCP has chosen for us, right? And it's like they're throwing red meat, and we keep jumping at it, And having said that, the center left and the left is different than the right. First of all, let's be blunt. The right has more money than we do, and they are also more, like, my observation is that they're more authority driven. So, like, if the powers that be in the decision making circles on the right decide that this is going to be the message, it's easier for them to get all moving in the same direction. We have the center left and the left. We're it's funny because, like, the conservatives always say we're the mavericks and stuff, and they accuse us of being sheep. Have you ever gone to a New Democrat convention? Have you ever talked to civil society in Alberta and try to get them to agree on anything? I mean, everyone's got their opinions, and we almost spend more time criticizing each other than we do criticizing the UCP. And it's not a question of lack of discipline. It's just that we've got all these ideas bubbling, and we want change to come really fast. And so I don't think we could ever turn the center and the center left into anything that's like a mirror image of the right, and nor should we. Um, but I think for the party, we have to stop taking their bait and focus, more on proposition than just opposition.
Yeah. It's fascinating to me because I think one of the things that's remarkable about the right is they have this capacity to say, hey, I don't like that thing, vaccines. Let's say vaccines because
Yeah,
that's easy. I don't like vaccines because Fox News told me they're bad, and somebody who can make a lot of money by making me afraid told me that they're bad. So I've decided that I don't like vaccines, and you don't like vaccines. You're also kind of racist. But hey, we both don't like vaccines, so I can overlook the fact that you're kind of racist, and we can go
exactly.
after the vaccines. Whereas the center, particularly the left, as soon as there's that one little thing that there's a disagreement on, and I'm not saying in any way that you should overlook racism, to be clear, because I know I'll get a comment on that one. But eh, finding that, okay, we've got this one piece of common ground. I'm going to overlook the fact that you've got a little bit of crazy that I don't necessarily like, because we both believe that this common ground is important to something that the left isn't historically very good on. And I think that the left also, as you said very well there with the ideas bubbling up, the left is very, very good at getting distracted by the current thing of the day. I mean, like,
Yeah,
here's my hot take I'm going to get myself in trouble with, but it's mind blowing to me that the left in this province has the capacity to organize protests every weekend because of events which are horrifying and tragic that are occurring on the other side of the world.
yeah,
Well, our democracy in this province is literally being subverted on the day to day. Like,
yeah,
it's bad. Don't get me wrong. It's horrible. Don't get me wrong. But a protest every Sunday in Alberta isn't going to have any impact on the Middle East crisis, but it absolutely could have an impact on what's actually going on in this province. But we want to do the big things on the left, I guess. Um,
yeah.
last two questions for you,
Okay.
sir. And then we'll get you onto your weekend because you've been very generous with your time.
Yeah.
Um,
I've enjoyed the
Healthcare.
conversation. Healthcare. Yeah.
So Alberta had the model of healthcare that, according to many experts and according to many physicians, I mean, we had a conversation just recently with the president of the AMA, Dr. Paul Parks, where he was very, very clear that the integrated health system is a model that is the model of envy around the world. There are many people who are currently trying to emulate the healthcare system that the province of Alberta has and is
And yeah,
doing its
yeah,
very
yeah,
best to disassemble.
yeah.
If you were to become the new leader of the NDP, how are you going to go about and I'm going to allow myself a little bit of language here because I already went after the protests thing, so I'm going to get in trouble this episode no matter what. But how would you propose going about unfucking the state of healthcare in this province?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're two different things, right? What would I do as opposition leader in the next 3 years, and what would I do as premier? Um, as opposition leader, as I said before, there's a limited toolbox, right? Because the decision-making power is with the government. But the healthcare system is foundational for our economy. It's foundational for our families and our communities. It's also foundational for the New Democrats. I mean, we created Medicare. I mean, it was Tommy Douglas, first as a premier in Saskatchewan, and then as the federal leader, who made the deal with the Liberals in a minority government. Once again, going back to that point about the value of what happens in Ottawa. So we created it. We have to protect it, right? And people expect that, and we've proven that we're the best champions for public health care. So if our opposition leader, defending public health care would be one of my top priorities. Um, but this is one of the things that I think that the New Democrats have to do a little bit better in opposition. Like, we have to be better at actually educating. And I know people's attention spans are short, but I'm not sure that people understand what the UCP is doing, what motivates them, what it means. So, for example, uh, you know, what is this refocusing, right? I mean, like that's the deliberately vague term that they're using. They're basically breaking up AHS, and I've heard one of my uh, counterparts in this leadership race saying, well, we can't possibly defend AHS. It's like, you know what? Yeah, we should. We should defend AHS, not because it's perfect, but because one health authority for the whole province actually makes sense, for the reasons that you were just saying. I mean, the world was looking to us because of our model, and our model was successful because it had economies of scale, it had efficiencies, it had centers of excellence. The problem was that it was not well funded, and it was being starved. I would argue deliberately. But I think what people also have to understand is that what the UCP is doing is they're breaking up a system that worked. Obviously, always could be better, but they're breaking up a system that worked, and they're doing it for two reasons. First, because they've been convinced by the crazy anti-vaxxers, and I'll probably get in trouble for using the word crazy, and I apologize. That's a disrespectful word. So the anti-vax crowd, the convoy crowd, didn't like to be told that they should care about spreading a potentially deadly disease, and they wanted to be able to, go out to Tim Hortons and whatever it is, and ignore public health advice, even when there was a pandemic raging, because their freedom to do whatever they want would trump the freedom of other people to health and life, right? And so so that's the first. So the breaking up AHS is to punish AHS for actually engaging in the sin of public health. And I think we have to understand that they're breaking it up so that we can never actually be prepared to deal with a pandemic in the future again. People have to understand that. The other thing is they're breaking it up, as conservatives have always done. They want to make the public system fail so they can justify privatizing it. And I talked about the private vultures circling around the Recovery Alberta conference. I think that's just the start. So we need to be talking. The New Democrats as opposition need to be talking about this, right? Instead of, and I'm on the pandemic stuff. I'm afraid that we seeded the field, right? It's like, the convoy won, and now we can't talk about it. So I want to make it clear that if I were opposition leader, and especially if I were premier, I would bring back public health, and I would be unapologetic about saying that the government has an obligation to keep people safe and healthy at all times, but especially during pandemics. And yes, that sometimes means doing things like having vaccine campaigns where you actually name it and say that vaccines are actually the best. Vaccines have saved more people than any other medical intervention in the history of humanity. And I think it's shameful that we on the left haven't defended that history aggressively enough. I also think, and I actually will be announcing this tomorrow, but we need to keep people healthy by doing things like introducing higher standards for indoor air quality, not just for, in the context of COVID, but everything, right? I mean, we have rules on clean water. We should have rules on clean air because most people spend most of their time inside. And we should certainly be doing that in places where people gather, like schools and healthcare facilities. And, so the New Democrats should be the unapologetic defenders, not just of public health care, but public health. Like that's one of the things that I'm really disappointed about over the last few years is that we let the convoy crowd win. And if I were a leader, I would push back.
Last question for you, sir.
Sure.
Well, I say last question. There will be probably one more. Uh, any thoughts? I mean, you have the because we were unable to get together until today, and for the record, it is April 27th of 2024 on the day of this recording. I've had to start say that because this province moves so quickly with politics now that like tomorrow, I don't know, Daniel Smith's going to say something crazy about corsets.
Yeah.
That would never happen. Um, but it's we're recording this on April 27th. These two things hadn't shown up when we had the conversations with the other leadership candidates. They've shown up now. I'm talking about Bills 18 and Bill 20. Anything you want to say on those things before I get to my very, very last question?
Yeah. I mean, Bill 18 basically will allow the province to put itself between municipalities and the federal government, and also between universities and the federal government. Basically, every institution that's funded by the provincial government, in whole or in part, will be affected by this legislation. And I think, and then Bill 20, of course, is the bill that will introduce political parties in the two big cities. It will give the provincial government the ability to unelect people who have been duly elected in municipal elections, and it even changed municipal legislation. I think both of these pieces of legislation are huge red flags for Albertans because they indicate a real significant and growing authoritarian tendency, and I use that word, very, very pointedly. Like this is authoritarian stuff, right? I mean, there's a huge irony here because the UCP and Daniel Smith in particular like to, put themselves forward as the party of freedom, but here we have them using legislation to restrict the freedoms of publicly funded institutions and to restrict the freedoms of municipal governments and honestly to restrict the freedoms of Alberta voters, right? And so this isn't freedom. This is the opposite of freedom. Actually, that's one point that I like, a more general point that I would make. As a candidate for the NDP leadership, I feel really strongly that we on the progressive side of the political spectrum have to reclaim this concept of freedom, because it has been perverted and weaponized by the right to deliver the opposite of freedom. Because the best way to ensure freedom for Albertans and the citizens of any democracy is actually to support them in order to live full lives. And so all the things that we stand for as progressives are actually the things that will deliver real freedom. So like, freedom of education will give public education will give freedom of opportunity. Public health care will give freedom to life and health. Investments in public housing and housing construction will create a situation in which people have the freedom to not be, worried at the end of the month whether they can keep a roof over their head. I mean, like, I would actually argue that progressive parties like the New Democrats are the real parties of freedom, because through our social democratic approach, we're balancing the scales and giving people who, because otherwise, if the scales aren't balanced, then the only people who really have true freedom are the ones with wealth. And they're the only ones who can make choices because money gives them choices. And and that's where social democrats come in. For everyone else, we through our support of public services and regulations in the public interest, like regulations on environmental regulations, consumer regulations, labor regulations. This isn't red tape. These are protections for ordinary people so that they can live freer, fuller lives. And so, like, I actually really feel that we should reclaim that concept of freedom and cast it in a progressive way. Instead of, and this is and like throughout this conversation, I've been pointing to examples of where we've ceded the field to conservatives. We ceded the field to conservatives on public health. We ceded the field to conservatives on the economy. We've conceded the field to conservatives on this concept of freedom. We have to stop doing that. We are the party of public health. We are the party, we can be the party of the economy, right? I would actually argue, and I have argued, that we could be the party that saves our oil and gas industry, in brackets, from itself, because if it doesn't, pivot towards a lower carbon future, it won't have a future, right? And so we could be the party that says, okay, we own the resource. We're done sitting on the sidelines. We're going to act like owners, like Peter Lougheed said, and we're going to tell the oil and gas companies that we have to prepare for a different future and seize opportunities, right? And so in that way, we could become the party that actually saves oil and gas. And so it's like, let's stop ceding the field on all these important issues. Because that's how we get put in this little box about being only the party, you're the party that stands up for trans kids and nothing else, right? Obviously, that's something that we have to do, because it's core to our values and who we are. But they want to put us in this little box. They keep trying to put us in this little box, and we keep shrinking ourselves and allowing ourselves to be shrunken, and so that we fit their definition of out of touch left wingers, right? And let's get out of the box. Let's stop ceding the territory. And I'm convinced that, taking that strong social democratic approach, being bigger rather than smaller, going back to our roots, being more New Democrat, not less. That's the way that will get the attention of Albertans. That's the way we'll inspire them, and I think it's the way that we'll win the next election, and not just in 2027. That's the way we'll win elections in the future as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, as you were talking about the freedom piece there and the UCP, Danielle Smith has characterized herself as a libertarian, and I think one of the dangers of people who label themselves libertarian as opposed to being actual libertarians is what it means to them is I want to do what I want, and with small power bases, that's not terrible. But as you gain more power, whether through political office or commercial success, you start to encounter more and more guardrails to keep you from utilizing that power in ways that hurts other people. And it seems like what Danielle Smith has done is she said, no, but I want to do what I want. And if these guardrails are in my way, I will just get rid of them so that I can continue to do what I want because I'm a libertarian. And it's not at all representative of, I think, what a lot of historical libertarians would identify with. And it's certainly not representative of freedom. Yeah, I think the NDP would do well to start talking more about freedom. Personally, I'm
Yeah,
not an NDPer, to be
yeah.
clear. I have stayed out of the fray on this regard. Last question for you, sir. It's the big one.
Okay.
You ready?
Yeah.
Given the opportunity, under the right set of circumstances, would you flip off the Western Standard again?
I have no regrets about flipping the bird to the reporter from the Western Standard. And for those who haven't seen it, there is a picture of me giving the one finger salute uh, at a demonstration. And I know the conservatives in general and the folks at the Western Standard in particular have tried to say, "Oh, this is Gil McGowan, the leader of the NDP affiliated Alberta Federation of Labor, giving the finger to all Albertans." Uh, that was not the case. I was giving the finger to a very particular person, and he was a so-called reporter working for the Western Standard, which is sort of another version of Rebel Media, and I was invited to attend a demonstration against the Sovereignty Act in front of the legislature. As a bunch of young people who had organized it, and it was a small demonstration. And what this guy from the Western Standard had done is he had tipped off the convoy crowd that there was this little demonstration, and there was more of them. There was more of the convoy crowd people than the people at the demonstration. And I came there with my son, and just to watch. And when we got there, there was this little knot of people protesting the Sovereignty Act, like our people, right? And they were mostly students, and they were surrounded by all these guys, and they were mostly guys from the convoy protests carrying these "fuck Trudeau" signs, and they were shouting down the people who were trying to speak, and that got my back up. Right. And so I walked through the crowd, and they were actually packing up. They were going to leave. Right. And because I was a little late, and they saw me and say, "Oh, Gil McGowan's here. Would you speak?" And it's like, okay. I never say no. And so I gave a little speech. And then when I was trying to leave, uh, you know, like the guy from the Western Standard had his camera there, and and he was and he was basically saying, like, why are you yelling at Albertans? I said, I'm not. I'm criticizing the Sovereignty Act. And then he said, and I said, he said, well, I told him I didn't want to do an interview with him. He says, I'm a member of the press gallery. And I rolled my eyes. I used to be a reporter. So like, it's like, so what I said to him is like, he said, you're not a real reporter. You're a right-wing activist with a camera. Um, and then at that point, and my son, honestly, I don't want to go into it, but my son is immunocompromised, right? So he's wearing a mask, right? And the protesters were yelling at him and stuff, and this guy was sticking the camera. So I flipped him the bird. I did, and here's the thing though. Okay, I rarely do that. I can't think of another. Like, I've been president of the Federation of Labor for 19 years. If there were other instances where I'd flipped the bird to people, there would be pictures. So I've never done it before. Uh, but I understand that being the leader of the opposition and the premier is a different job than being a union leader. And so I guarantee you that I will find more civilized ways to express my dissatisfaction with people who are pretending to be reporters and are really just trying to warp the minds of innocent people on the internet. And that doesn't mean that I won't be annoyed with Western Standard, because what's not to be annoyed with? But I won't flip them the bird. But if you look closely, you might see it in my eyes.
Well, for what it's worth, we are one FOIP request result and one complaint to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner away for a very, very, very special episode on the Western Standard that's going to
Oh,
be
wow.
all kinds of fun, and we'll be
Well,
flipping our.
just on that point, the guy who orchestrated that thing, and I gave the finger to, he ended up being a press secretary. He was hired as a press secretary for the UCP
Yeah.
after that. So that tells you.
And I seem to recall that the office for which he's a press secretary was altogether unsurprising. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Uh, Before we wrap it up here, sir, anything else you want to say? Anything else you want to hear? Have people here? Where do people go if they want to learn more about your campaign? I assume there's a website,
There
maybe
is a
even a
website.
Facebook page. What do you
Yeah.
want people to know?
So so we do have a website. It's gilforalberta.ca. And I hesitate to do this, but I think I have to. This campaign is really expensive. The party has set a entry fee for all the candidates of $60,000. Even though I'm the president of the Federation of Labor, the election finance law restricts unions from making donations, so I have to rely on individuals, and the people I represent are working people, and there's one other candidate who has friends who are probably have a little deeper pockets than mine. And so it's hard. It's been hard for us to because every couple of weeks we have to give them another $20,000 just to be in the race, and then everything beyond that, the website, and I've got a few staff, digital staff, and that kind of and organizing staff. It costs money. Um, so my fundraising chair would be annoyed with me if I didn't mention that this is expensive, and that in order for me to stay in the race and keep raising these issues, it costs money. So I would encourage people to, give what they can if they like what they heard today.
It is a ranked ballot, unless I'm mistaken. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Who's your second? I mean, one of the things that they've said is on the ballots, it's going to come down to probably the first, second, at most the third ballot in this particular race, and everybody's saying like, hey, if you vote for so and so in the first, make sure you vote for me in the second.
Yeah. Well, let me see. I'm going to tell you who my second choice is, but I'm going to tell you who I have a concern about too. Okay, and I'm just going to be blunt about this. If the presumed front runner in the race right now is Naheed, um, and and as I've said before, I think he's a great guy and he was a great mayor in Calgary. But I think people have to be really clear-eyed that if he becomes leader, he will lead the party in an entirely different direction than what I'm proposing. Like, it's diametrically opposed. I'm a social democrat, and he is a small L liberal by his own definition. So like he's former business management consultant, and and he prefers liberal policies. I'm a social democrat. I prefer a bigger role for government, and the big difference is like the direct role for government in the economy. So I believe in crown corporations. I don't believe in contracting out or privatization. I think we should talk about workers and wages and benefits and worker protection and make it easier for people to join unions. He hasn't mentioned anything about workers or unions. He hasn't mentioned anything about increasing the minimum wage yet, which seems like a real no-brainer to me after 5.5 years of wage freeze, and but so there, like, the party will be vastly different. So I can't bring myself to say that Naheed would be my second choice, because he would take the party in a direction that I think not only is inappropriate for the New Democrats, but I actually think we would lose, right? Because those big issues I talked about, affordability, the changing economy, that we need real hardcore solutions that involve the government stepping in to protect the public interest. He's made it clear that he's reluctant to do that. So I want a social democratic NDP. He wants a more, he calls it the muscular middle. I call it liberal. I will point out that liberals don't do well in the West. And there's, like, I grew up in the rural Alberta, and people used to talk about the Alberta trifecta. No rats, no sales tax, no liberals. Okay, so is that the best way forward? I don't think it's strategy for, like, yes, like, yeah, he has a higher profile than I do, yes, but I think the key to success is being a social democratic party, not a liberal party. So that's why I wouldn't choose Naheed as my second choice. My second choice would be Kathleen Ganley. The only thing that she and I fund, like, I mean, like, I'm a little bit more hardcore in terms of my social democratic positions than she is. I disagree with her position on entertaining severing ties with the federal party for the reasons I suggested, but I think that we could have a conversation. I think I would I could work with her. I could work with all of them, to tell you the truth. But yeah, Kathleen would be my second choice, because I think we're most closely aligned. But having said that, I still encourage people to choose me as their first choice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks so much for. I mean, I'll be honest. If there's one person in the leadership race that coming out of the leadership race, I just want them to have more. And again, not a member, stayed out of it entirely. But if there's one person that I just want to see get more airtime, I think Jody just has
Jody.
so much fire. I just,
Oh
oh,
yeah,
I
yeah,
dig
yeah.
that. I
No,
dig that.
I think the world of Jody too. She, she's got a real fire in her belly, and that's what you need in politics. So, I didn't know Jody very well before this, but I've come to know her, and I like her a lot. So, Kathleen, Jody, and don't get me wrong, I like Sarah too, and I don't dislike Naheed. I just don't agree with him, and I think that he would take the party in a direction um, that isn't in the party or the province's best interest. And that's my perspective because I'm a social democrat, and I think that that's the way forward. Let's win by being more New Democrat, not less.
Fair enough. Yeah, my favorite part of listening to the and watching the debate that you guys had just a couple of days ago was you could hear Jody's like laugh,
Yeah,
her just filling the room, and it was very sincere and honest, and
it
that was
was. It was. And she was right next to me, so every time I was talking, like you could particularly hear it. Yes, but yes, yeah. No, she's a lot of fun. She is. Yeah,
yeah. Gil McGowan, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. What was that website again for the
it's
donations and the things and the stuff?
gilforalberta.ca.
There we go. All right. I want to thank you so much for taking the time. I'm glad that we were finally able to connect. Thank you so much for being I think this is going to be the longest conversation out of any of the leadership candidates that we've had. So thank you very much for indulging us on that.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
And
Thanks, Nate.
we'll be following the race for the rest of the race.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay. Thanks very much, Nate.
And that's it for another episode of The Breakdown. As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here, we would love nothing more than if you thought about signing up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just the price of a fancy cup of coffee a month, you can help us continue to produce this kind of content. Whether you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, in which case, maybe leave a review and a rating, or whether you're watching it on one of our streaming platforms, we want to say a big thank you to everybody who is part of the Breakdown's audience. And as always, take care of each other and keep the conversation going.